My name is Margaret Ellison, and I am 64 years old. I have lived a long life of measured resilience, the kind built quietly over decades, rather than forged through singular, dramatic crises. Still, nothing prepared me for the day I learned that my entire inheritance, the home I grew up in, the land my grandparents tended, the savings my parents built over 50 years, had been signed away without a single conversation. Not a warning, not even the courtesy of a phone call. My family has always been small and tightly wound, the kind that looks picture perfect from the outside but frays subtly behind closed doors. I was the elder daughter, the responsible one, the organizer of medical files and tax folders and holiday meals. My younger sister, Lila, had always been the sweet one, at least in our parents' eyes. She was delicate, soft-spoken, and quick to offer a hug. I was steady, practical, and far more likely to offer solutions than comfort. Growing up, I learned early that sweetness photographs better than reliability. Even so, I loved my sister. I still do. But that doesn't erase the truth. Our parents always saw her through a softer lens. When she forgot chores, they laughed it off. When I did, it was a sign I was slipping. When she cried, they held her. When I cried, they asked what I intended to do next. Through the years, promises were made, sometimes lightly, sometimes solemnly. My parents told us more than once, "You girls will share everything equally one day. It's only fair." They said it when my father retired, when my mother sold her antique business, when they updated their will after my grandmother died. I never questioned it. Not because I needed the money, but because I trusted them. That trust dissolved one bright Thursday morning. I had stopped by their home, a modest 2-story farmhouse sitting on 5 acres, to bring them groceries and refill their medications. When I entered the kitchen, they were unusually quiet, seated at the table with stiff shoulders and clasped hands. "Margaret," my mother said, eyes glancing anywhere but at me, "there's something we need to tell you." My father slid a folder toward me. "It's about the estate." I didn't feel dread at first, only curiosity, until I opened the folder. My mother had signed it. My father had signed it. And so had the attorney, the house, the land, the savings account, the investments, all of it transferred to Lila. There was no trace of my name. I stared at the papers, reading the lines twice before my mind caught up. My voice stayed level, years of self-control holding me steady, but something inside me folded like wet paper. "When?" I finally asked. "Last month," my father murmured. Last month. I had been at their house 3 times that month. They had laughed with me, hugged me, asked about my work, all while hiding this. My mother attempted a fragile smile. "You don't need it the way Lila does. She's nicer, more attentive. It just made sense." Nicer. The word landed with a sting so sharp it almost felt childish to react to it, yet it echoed every unspoken imbalance of the past 60 years. I closed the folder gently, afraid my hands might betray what I felt. "I see," I said. 2 words, perfectly calm. My calmness always unnerved them. It unnerved Lila even more. And right on cue, she stepped out from the hallway where she had clearly been listening. Her expression was a blend of feigned surprise and barely concealed triumph. "Margaret, I didn't want it to be awkward," she said softly. I've always been here for them." She emphasized the word "here" with a delicacy that felt intentional. I looked at her for a long moment. She shifted under the silence. Inside, devastation pulsed like a bruise forming, but I refused to feed it. I refused to give her the spectacle she wanted. "If this is what you've all decided," I said, "I'll respect it." I gathered my purse, nodded once, and walked out. My breaths remained even, my footsteps steady. Only when I reached my car did I allow my hands to tremble on the steering wheel. Something about that decision felt off, not the outcome, but the process. My parents were impulsive at times, but never secretive. They would not have made such a monumental decision without talking to me, unless someone encouraged them to. I didn't accuse, I didn't confront. I simply drove home in silence, letting an unsettling thought settle into place. Whatever happened here wasn't just about inheritance, it was about influence. 2 days later, a neighbor confirmed my suspicion. I had returned to drop off a winter coat my mother had asked for. Their neighbor, Mrs. Daly, spotted me by the driveway. "Oh, Margaret," she said, lowering her voice. "I'm surprised to see you here after everything your sister said. I thought you two weren't speaking anymore." My heart thudded once, deep and heavy. "What exactly did she say?" I asked. Mrs. Daly hesitated, eyes darting toward the house. "I shouldn't get involved, dear, but it sounds like she was very persuasive during the estate meetings." She stopped herself, lips tightening. But it was enough. More than enough. A flicker of certainty sparked inside me. Something had happened behind closed doors. Something Lila did not want me to know. I left the driveway with one consuming thought. I needed to find out exactly how my sister influenced our parents' decision and why she felt the need to hide it. The neighbor's offhand remark stayed with me long after I drove away. It threaded itself through my thoughts, quiet but insistent, refusing to fade the way idle gossip usually does. I have lived long enough to know that truth often leaks out through the cracks of casual conversation. Mrs. Daly was no gossip. If anything, she was cautious to a fault, which made her reluctance, and her choice of words, all the more telling. Very persuasive during the estate meetings. She could have said involved, helpful, present, but persuasive? That word implied intent. As I sat at home that evening, the papers from the folder replayed in my mind with sharp clarity. My sister's signature, the dates, the airtight confidence with which she stood behind my parents as they delivered the news. And now, the suggestion that she had been speaking for me in my absence. I poured myself a cup of tea, set it beside my notebook, and began writing down the timeline as I understood it. I needed clarity. Composure was something I had always relied on, and this situation would be no exception. I wrote down the date of the final signature, 1 month ago, and worked backward. When had Lila become so entrenched in my parents' affairs? When had the shift begun? The flashbacks came unbidden. 2 years earlier, after my father's knee surgery, Lila started stopping by more often. She brought soup, read mail aloud, sat with my mother on afternoons when the house felt too quiet. She appeared helpful, dedicated. At first I felt grateful. But then came the subtle changes. My parents started calling her before calling me, even for matters I had handled for years. Insurance questions, repairs, medication refills. "Oh, Lila already took care of it," they'd say if I asked. Her car became a fixture in their driveway. Her opinions became their opinions, and little by little, though they never said it directly, they began treating me like a distant relative who stopped by out of politeness, rather than a daughter who had been present for every major transition of their lives. At the time, I chalked it up to aging, proximity, and the convenience of having a more emotionally demonstrative child nearby. But the neighbor's remark reframed everything. What if Lila had been doing more than helping? What if she had been shaping narratives, drip by drip, until my parents no longer questioned whether she should speak for the family? Back in the present, I turn to my files. I keep meticulous records, decades of statements, letters, reports. In one folder labeled Parents, Legal and Financial, I expected to find the notes from our last joint meeting with their previous attorney. It had been a simple review of their existing will, 2 years before the estate transfer. But the folder was thinner than I remembered. I flipped through it slowly, each missing page tightening something in my chest. There had been a binder clip holding supplemental documents, early drafts of estate discussions we had once reviewed together. Now only half remained. I set the folder aside and returned to my timeline. Around the same period the missing documents would have been relevant, I remembered an odd phone call from my mother. She had told me they were redoing some paperwork, but insisted there was nothing important for me to worry about. I had believed her. After all, why wouldn't I? But the dates lined up too neatly. They must have been reviewing documents months, possibly a full year, before anyone said a word to me. The hurt rose again, sharp and immediate, but I forced myself to breathe through it. I have spent my entire adult life mastering the art of calm. It has protected me in difficult jobs, complicated relationships, and now it would protect me here. I reminded myself that hurt does not mean helpless. Feelings do not erase facts, and facts were what I needed. I turned my attention to why my parents assumed I didn't need any inheritance. It wasn't entirely untrue. I had built a solid career as a hospital administrator, worked long hours, and saved responsibly. I owned my home and had no children to provide for, but my stability had somehow been weaponized into an argument that I deserved less, or, in this case, nothing at all. I began to notice small contradictions, moments I had ignored. My mother once joked that I was too independent for my own good. My father had laughed and said, "Lila needs us more." Even then, I knew they meant it affectionately, but affection can coexist with bias. I tried calling Lila that night, seeking answers rather than confrontation. She picked up on the third ring. "Lila," I said, "I'd like to talk about what's been going on. Mrs. Daly mentioned something about estate meetings." There was a brief pause on her end, a subtle, telling one. "Oh, she's confused," Lila said lightly. "You know how she is. Let's not get bogged down in detail." But I heard something in her voice, a flicker of nerves she couldn't conceal. "I'd still like to know what she meant," I continued. "Well," she sighed, "I've just been helping. You have your life. I'm here. It's natural things shifted." A gentle deflection, familiar, intentional. When I asked again, her tone tightened. "Margaret, don't start digging into things. It won't change anything." She hung up shortly after. Her avoidance was confirmation on its own. The next morning, I returned to my parents' home, determined to quietly access the office where we kept shared family folders, old insurance statements, titles, and legal notes. They had always trusted me with organization. Even in the shifting dynamics, they never changed the filing system. I sifted through drawers, reviewing envelopes and binders. Most looked untouched, but one drawer, the bottom right, had an empty space where a thick brown folder should have been. I froze. It was the folder containing the original financial drafts my parents once asked me to keep safe. I remembered placing it there myself years ago, and now it was gone. A cold certainty spread across my chest as I stared at the empty drawer. I wasn't just missing papers. Someone had deliberately removed the one file that could show exactly how the estate was supposed to be divided. The missing file wasn't just misplaced. It was hidden. I knew that. The moment I saw the vacant space in the drawer, the faint rectangle of dust, framing where it should have been. My parents might misplace their reading glasses or forget a lunch date, but documents, important ones, never. My mother kept meticulous order for most of her life, and though her memory slipped at times now, she still respected organization. And my father, even with his unsteady hands, would never rearrange files without telling me, which meant someone else had moved it. Calmly, I closed the drawer and looked around the office. The air smelled faintly of old paper and lemon polish. Dust settled evenly across the tops of boxes, except one. A mid-sized storage box in the corner had a streak where someone had dragged a hand across recently. I knelt beside it, easing off the lid. Inside were folders stacked neatly, though not in the order I remembered. Sorting through them, I found tax documents from 5 years ago, old pension statements, and then, half buried beneath unrelated files, a slim manila folder with my handwriting on the tab. I exhaled slowly. I opened it. Inside were photocopies of the original financial plans my parents and I reviewed years before, when everything was clear, equal, and uncomplicated. Each document showed a joint inheritance, half to me, half to Lila, with a contingent clause for medical care. Nothing dramatic, nothing contentious. These copies reassured me. They were proof of what once existed. But as I went deeper into the box, I found more folders, some newer, dated within the last 2 years, and those told a different story entirely. The first altered document I found was a revised estate draft. It looked legitimate at first glance, but certain details didn't align. The date of the meeting was marked 6 months earlier than I knew my parents had visited any attorney. My father's signature was crooked, thin, and lacked the firm grounding it usually carried, even after his surgery. It looked guided. My mother's handwriting, typically curved and neat, appeared rushed, almost shaky, as if she had signed something without truly reading it. But what unsettled me most were the notes clipped to the documents. The handwriting wasn't my mother's, and it certainly wasn't my father's. It was Lila's. Small loops, rounded letters, the faint upward tilt at the end of every line, handwriting I recognized instantly from years of birthday cards and grocery lists, she stuck to the refrigerator. Discuss asset division, one note read. Push for expedited review, another said. Convince Margaret's independence. Convince, not inform, not suggest, convince. My throat tightened as I read the words again, slower this time. It felt surreal to see my name reduced to a line item in my sister's tidy planning. She had been orchestrating conversations about my life, my future, without me knowing a thing. As I sifted deeper through the stack, I uncovered another draft, one that looked more polished. This one omitted my name entirely. Every mention of equal division had been replaced by vague language about most fitting beneficiary. No initials, no notes from me, no indication I had even been considered. A sick, hollow feeling bloomed in my chest. I had spent so many years defending Lila, shielding her fragile feelings from harsh realities, helping her through breakups, covering for her late assignments in school, driving her home from parties when she couldn't bear to call our parents. I was the protector, the older sister who soothed storms and absorbed tension, and this was what she did with that trust. I leaned back against the wall, letting the weight of it settle. Betrayal at my age feels different than it does in youth. There's no melodrama, no slammed doors or shouted accusations. There's only a deep, aching clarity. And clarity, I found, could be far more painful. I took the documents to the living room, laid them out neatly on the coffee table, and waited for my parents to return from their afternoon walk. When they walked through the door, my father first, leaning gently on his cane, my mother following with her soft, tired smile, I felt a flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, they would see what I saw. But when I showed them the altered drafts, the inconsistencies, the notes in Lila's handwriting, they exchanged a glance I knew too well. Margaret, my mother sighed, sitting beside me, you're overreacting. My father nodded. Lila was just helping. You know she means well. She signed documents on your behalf, I said quietly. She pushed for changes you never discussed with me. That's because she's here more often, my mother replied, and we were feeling overwhelmed. It's natural to lean on the child who's closest, my father added. Their words weren't unkind. That almost made it worse. They didn't see the manipulation, not because they were foolish, but because emotional influence can be much more subtle than deceit. They loved both their daughters. They simply believed the narrative presented to them. I realized then that arguing would only push them further into defensiveness. What I needed was evidence, undeniable, organized, chronological. So I did what I've always done best. I stayed calm. I gathered every document, photographed each page, and returned the files to the exact positions I found them. My parents didn't need to know what I planned, only that I was stepping back. I'm going home, I told them gently. We'll talk again another day. My mother hugged me with distracted warmth. My father patted my shoulder. Neither sensed the shift inside me. As I walked out, I noticed a small card half tucked beneath the hallway table. Likely dropped, likely overlooked. It was glossy, with embossed lettering, an appointment card. I picked it up. The name on it was of a lawyer I had never heard my parents mention, not once. I stared at the unfamiliar attorney's name, realizing this secret meeting might be the missing piece of a much deeper pattern, and I needed to find out exactly who orchestrated it. The name on the appointment card stayed with me through the night. It repeated itself in my mind, the way a distant bell keeps echoing long after it's rung. I had never once heard my parents mention this attorney. Not in casual conversation, not in passing, not in any of the years I helped them manage their affairs. Their longtime legal matters had always gone through a small, trusted office they'd used for decades. So why this new lawyer? And why now? By morning, I had already decided what I would do. I didn't tell my parents. I certainly didn't tell Lila. I dressed in quiet, deliberate clothing, something professional enough not to appear emotional, but soft enough to convey respect. I gathered a notebook, a folder for documents, and drove to the address printed on the card. The law office was a modest brick building tucked between a dentist's practice and a real estate agency. Nothing suspicious on the surface. Inside, the The waiting area smelled faintly of strong coffee and copier toner. A receptionist greeted me politely, and within minutes I was ushered into a tidy office where a man in his 50s, attorney Michael Hartwell, extended a hand. Mrs. Ellison, he said warmly, I didn't expect you, but please have a seat. The moment he spoke my name without hesitation, I knew he remembered something, and that gave me the first flicker of hope. I sat across from him, my hands folded in my lap. Thank you for seeing me without an appointment. I found this card in my parents' home. I'd like to understand why they met with you. He adjusted his glasses, choosing his words carefully. I assume this is about the estate review. The recent transfer, I clarified. He nodded slowly. Yes, though... He hesitated. Your parents weren't the primary ones handling those meetings. My heartbeat steadied, becoming strangely quiet. Who was? I asked. Your sister, Lila? The words were simple, but hearing them spoken aloud from a neutral party made them heavy, real in a way they hadn't been before. She coordinated the scheduling, he continued. She filled out the preliminary forms and presented herself as the main caregiver. She mentioned that you were overwhelmed with work and that you preferred not to be involved in day-to-day decisions. A slow ache pressed against my chest. I never said any such thing, I replied. I didn't assume you did, he said gently. These situations can be complicated. Family dynamics often are. He opened a drawer and retrieved a thin binder. Your sister insisted on expediting the revisions, saying your parents were under stress and needed everything settled quickly. Normally, I would request that all parties be present, especially in a matter concerning multiple beneficiaries, but she explained that communication between you and your parents had become strained. I felt something inside me constrict, not anger, but erasure. It is a peculiar pain to realize you have been spoken for, reshaped in someone else's narrative without your knowledge. And my parents? I asked. How did they appear to you during these meetings? He pressed his fingertips together thoughtfully. Confused, not incapable, just guided. Your sister spoke for them often. They deferred to her. She brought in documents she'd prepared notes on. She pushed for decisions to be finalized quickly. Selective information, selective care, selective framing, a quiet strategy. Did they ever express doubts? I asked. At one point, he said carefully. Your father seemed unsure about removing you from the estate, but your sister told him you had verbally agreed to it. My breath caught, not sharply, but in a slow, stunned release. She said what? That you told your family you were financially secure and preferred they leave everything to her so she could maintain the property. I closed my eyes for a moment, grounding myself. I could not afford to react emotionally in front of him. Calm, clarity, composure. Those were my tools. When I opened my eyes again, my voice was steady. That conversation never happened. He nodded again, the subtle sympathy in his expression confirming he had suspected as much. To be transparent with you, he said, I felt uneasy with how quickly everything was pushed through. I kept earlier drafts in case questions arose. Would you like to see them? Yes, I said, without hesitation. He went to the filing cabinet and retrieved a thick folder labeled with my parents' names. Inside were multiple versions of the will and estate documents, spanning nearly 18 months. I examined them carefully. The earliest drafts matched the old versions I had found at home. Equal inheritance, shared responsibilities, clear provisions. But the later drafts, those aligned with Lila's involvement, shifted subtly at first. Terms softened, roles blurred, vague language crept in. And then the final drafts removed my name completely. Attorney Hartwell handed me photocopies. You're welcome to take these. I believe transparency is important. I slid the papers into my evidence folder, feeling the weight of them, not just physically, but emotionally. This wasn't merely about assets. This was about how quietly someone can erase another person's place in a family. As I rose to leave, he paused. There's something else, he said. He reached into the back of the folder and handed me a single page from an earlier draft I hadn't examined yet. A clause, one small paragraph, tucked near the end. My eyes scanned it once, then twice. It stated, in the event that Margaret chooses distance from the family due to lifestyle, temperament, or personal preference, the estate shall default entirely to Lila. lifestyle, temperament, personal preference. These were not words my parents would ever have written, not in 1,000 years. I stared at the clause, knowing instantly this was not my parents' voice. Someone else had inserted it, and uncovering who and how would be the next step in unraveling the truth. The clause lingered in my mind long after I left the attorney's office. In the event that Margaret chooses distance from the family due to lifestyle, temperament, or personal preference, these were not legal terms. These were judgments disguised as pragmatism, lifestyle, temperament, personal preference. They implied I had willingly stepped away, that I had chosen separation, that I had been the architect of my own absence. But I had never stepped away. I had been pushed aside, slowly, invisibly, through small narratives spoken in rooms I was not invited into. I sat in my car for several minutes, rereading the clause, examining every word as though it held fingerprints. The tone was unmistakable. It didn't sound like my mother's gentle pragmatism or my father's measured logic. It sounded like someone trying to justify a predetermined outcome. Lila, it was her way. Soft persuasion wrapped in innocence. A tilt of the head, a tremor in the voice, a suggestion that sounded selfless on the surface but served her underneath. The clause read like her, word for word. As I drove home, memories surfaced with sudden clarity. Moments I had dismissed as typical sibling rivalry, but, in hindsight, revealed something sharper. When we were children, Lila would dissolve into tears if she didn't get her way, and I would be told to be the bigger sister. When we were teenagers, she confided in our parents about imagined slights, claiming I didn't like spending time with her whenever I sought solitude. And later, as adults, she would often mention to our parents how busy I seemed, always with a tone of martyrdom, as if she bore the emotional load of keeping us connected. And I, ever committed to peace, never corrected her narratives. Sitting at my dining table, I pressed my palms against the cool wood and took a long, steady breath. Being misunderstood hurts in ways few things do. Not the dramatic kind of pain that demands tears or raised voices, but a deep, quiet ache. The ache of realizing you have been seen through a distorted lens for years and never realized it. I needed perspective, someone neutral, someone who understood how influence could shape decisions, especially for those growing older. The next day, I made an appointment with a senior family advocate, a counselor who specialized in navigating elder decision-making and family conflict. The waiting room was warm and softly lit, filled with muted artwork and gentle instrumental music. When my name was called, I entered an office lined with shelves of books on psychology, aging, and mediation. The counselor, Eddie Chadwick, a woman in her 70s with bright, perceptive eyes, listened without interruption as I explained everything. The estate changes, the attorney's revelations, the subtle rewriting of my role in the family. When I finished, she leaned back slightly. "You're dealing with something more common than you may realize," she said. "Influence over elders often happens gradually, not always malicious. Sometimes it's simply the result of proximity, dependence, or fear." "Fear?" I asked. "Yes. As people age, they become more afraid of instability. They gravitate toward the person who feels most emotionally available. That person's version of reality can become dominant." She made them believe I didn't want to be involved. The counselor nodded. And they likely didn't question it because it fit a narrative they'd already begun to accept. You're independent, busy, self-sufficient. Those traits can be misinterpreted as emotional distance. I felt a heaviness in my chest, a blend of sorrow and recognition. "What do I do?" I asked quietly. She folded her hands on her lap. "First, decide what outcome you truly want. Not financially, emotionally. Do you want fairness, clarity, understanding, reparations?" "Not revenge," I said. "Not punishment. I want the truth, and I want to be seen accurately." "Then confront it," she said softly. "Not in anger, in clarity. Show them the evidence, the timeline, the discrepancies. Speak calmly. Document everything. Let the facts speak." I nodded slowly. This advice aligned perfectly with my instincts. I had spent my life navigating conflict through quiet intelligence rather than escalation. This would be no different. Before I left, she added, "One more thing. Your sister may not have acted purely out of greed. She may be afraid, of losing control, of losing their favor, of feeling less needed. Understanding that won't excuse her actions, but it may help you approach the situation with the grounding you'll need. I appreciated her honesty. Compassion and boundaries could coexist. I had always believed that. When I returned home, I set to work. On my kitchen table, I arranged everything I had collected, photocopies from Attorney Hartwell, the earlier drafts, the altered versions, the handwritten notes, the suspicious clause. I began building a chronological evidence folder, labeling each segment carefully. What happened, when it happened, who initiated it, facts, not emotions. This was no longer about the estate, not truly. It was about reclaiming my place in my own family's story. That evening, as I was sliding pages into protective sleeves, my phone rang. My parents' number. I hesitated, my fingers resting on the folder, before I answered. My mother's voice was trembling slightly. "Margaret, your father and I, we need to talk to you about the will." My pulse steadied into a quiet rhythm. "I'll come by tomorrow," I said. As I hung up, I wondered what had shaken them enough to call me now, and whether Lila already knew this conversation was coming. My parents' sudden request to meet felt less like reconciliation and more like a setup. Their voices on the phone had been strained, choosing caution over clarity, and when conversations begin that way in our family, it usually means someone else has already framed the narrative. I arrived the next morning with my evidence folder tucked securely in my bag. Not to confront, not to accuse, simply to illuminate. I had no intention of presenting everything, not yet. A steady drip of truth, I had decided, would be far more effective than an avalanche. When I pulled into the driveway, I noticed immediately that Lila's car was already there. Of course it was. She always arrived early when she sensed her version of events might be challenged. Inside the house, the air was tense. My father sat stiffly in his recliner, hands folded over his cane, while my mother paced near the window. Lila stood near the kitchen doorway with her arms crossed, her shoulders tight and defensive. The moment she saw me, she forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, good, you're here," she said. "We can finally clear up all this confusion." Confusion. A convenient word for behavior she didn't want examined. I set my coat on the back of a chair and greeted my parents softly. "You wanted to talk?" My mother gestured for me to sit. "Your sister told us you've become upset about the estate changes. We don't want any tension between you two." Lila nodded quickly. "Yes, I told them you've been reading too much into things. It's all a misunderstanding." I watched her carefully. She was talking too fast, too brightly, a sure sign she felt cornered. My father cleared his throat. "Lila said you think we made decisions behind your back." "She told us you're feeling excluded," my mother added, folding her hands. "We want you to know that's not true. You were just busy." The familiar narrative, busy, detached, uninterested, the story Lila had been feeding them for months, maybe years. I inhaled slowly, letting the breath steady me. "I'm glad we're talking. I think it's important we all hear the same information." Lila stiffened. "Margaret, please don't turn this into a fight." "I'm not fighting," I said calmly. "I'm clarifying." My parents exchanged a wary glance. I reached into my bag and pulled out a single sheet, just one, from the copies Attorney Hartwell had given me, an early revision draft showing equal inheritance signed by all three of us 2 years ago. "I found this in your files," I said, laying it gently on the coffee table. "It reflects what we discussed together." My mother looked surprised. "I remember this." My father frowned, leaning forward to examine the page. Before they could say anything more, Lila moved quickly, placing herself between them and the paper. "That's outdated, irrelevant. We changed everything because Margaret said she didn't want to worry about inheriting property." "I never said that," I replied evenly. My mother blinked, confused. "Lila told us you did." "I know," I said gently. "Which is why we need to talk about what was said and by whom." Lila's face flushed. "This is exactly why I didn't want this meeting. You're twisting things." I kept my tone level. "Then let's untwist them." My father looked between us, uncertainty settling over him like a shadow. "Lila, why didn't you show us this older document?" She hesitated, then straightened her shoulders. "I didn't think it mattered. Things changed. Margaret pulled away." "Did I?" I asked softly. Or did someone tell you I did? My mother's brow tightened, a faint crease of doubt forming. Lila, you said Margaret wasn't interested in being involved anymore. I said she was busy, Lila corrected quickly, and she was. That's not the same thing, I replied. A heavy silence followed. My father's eyes drifted to the paper again, then to me. Margaret, why do you have that document? Because, I said, choosing my words carefully, when I looked through your files, I found multiple drafts showing different versions of the estate. Some made sense, some didn't. Lila bristled. You went through their personal documents. I organized them, I corrected, as I have for years. My mother's gaze softened with recognition. Yes, I had indeed been the one who handled their paperwork for decades. I continued. Some drafts had inconsistencies in dates and signatures, and some had notes that weren't written by either of you. My father's eyes narrowed. Notes? I watched Lila's throat tighten as she swallowed. Yes, I said. Notes in handwriting I recognized. My mother's hand trembled slightly. Lila, did you write on any of the documents? Lila's composure cracked for a moment, her voice rising. I was helping. You both needed guidance. Margaret wasn't around. I was around, I said gently. I was simply not included. My father leaned back, the realization dawning in slow, painful increments. Why didn't you tell us any of this, Lila? She shook her head, tears gathering but not falling. Because you always listened to her. You always saw her as the responsible one, the reliable one. I had to show you I could be trusted too. The admission, though emotional, was revealing. Not malicious, desperate, but desperation can still be damaging. My mother reached out to her, torn between sympathy and confusion. We trusted you, but you told us things that weren't true. Lila wiped her eyes quickly, anger surfacing beneath the tremor. I didn't lie. I just framed things. Frame them how? I asked. She looked away. My father exhaled slowly, his voice low. I want to see the rest, all of it. Whatever documents you found. My mother nodded, her face pale. Yes, we need to understand everything. Please, Margaret, bring everything you have. For a moment, no one spoke. The balance in the room had shifted, not violently, but unmistakably. I closed my bag slowly, aware that the next step would expose the full truth, because my parents had just asked to see every document I had gathered. For the first time, my parents looked genuinely afraid they had made a terrible mistake. There was a tremor in their posture, a widened uncertainty in their eyes, an unmistakable recognition that something in their understanding of the past months had been fundamentally wrong. We sat at the dining table, the same table where childhood birthdays had been celebrated, where homework had been done, where decades of conversations, serious and trivial, had taken place. Yet this moment felt heavier than any before it. I placed my evidence folder on the table with deliberate calm. Not triumphant, not accusatory, just steady. My parents watched as I withdrew the documents one by one, arranging them in a precise chronological sequence. This is where we started, I said, sliding forward the earliest estate draft. The familiar signatures, the equal inheritance plan, the clear, mutual understanding. My mother nodded, her voice small. Yes, I remember this. Then I placed the next document beside it. A revised draft with subtle changes, still equal, but framed differently, with new language added. This was after Dad's surgery, I explained. A reasonable update. My father leaned forward, studying it. Yes. That was when we talked about long-term care. Then I added the third document, one dated several months later, the first draft Lila had been involved with. The language had shifted again, still equal on paper, but with vague provisions that raised questions. My mother frowned. I don't remember reviewing this one with you. You didn't, I said gently. You reviewed it with Lila. Lila stiffened. They asked me to help. I didn't respond. I simply added the next document. This one was unmistakably altered. Dates were mismatched. Signatures looked guided. Notes, Lila's handwriting, were clipped to the corner. My father's hand trembled as he picked it up. What is this? Part of a series of meetings with a different lawyer, I said. Meetings you didn't tell me about. Meetings Lila scheduled. That's not fair, Lila snapped. You're twisting everything. Then explain it, I said softly. Explain the mismatch in dates. Explain your notes. Her lips parted, but no sound came. I continued placing documents in order. Each one revealed more divergence, omissions, altered language, clauses that didn't resemble my parents' voices at all. I watched my parents' faces as they pieced together what I already knew, that they had not been as involved as they believed. My mother pressed a hand to her chest. Lila, you told us these were just routine updates. They were, she insisted. I was helping you. You said you felt overwhelmed. You said Margaret was always so busy. I never said she didn't want to be involved, my father interrupted quietly. Lila swallowed hard. I didn't say she didn't want to. I just expressed that she didn't need to be. That's not the same thing. I placed the final document, the one that removed me entirely, at the end of the sequence. The room went silent. My father looked at it for a long time as though trying to locate a memory that didn't exist. I don't remember approving this. You didn't, I said gently. Not fully, not clearly. This was the result of months of incremental changes. Changes made under the assumption that I was uninterested. My mother's eyes shone with tears. How could this happen? I didn't smile, didn't gloat, didn't look toward Lila for validation. I simply folded my hands in front of me. Because stories were told, I said quietly. Little ones, repeated ones. Stories about my distance, my disinterest, my lack of need. Small narratives that added up until they felt true. Lila let out a shaky breath. I didn't lie. I just interpreted things. My father looked at her with real hurt. You made us believe your sister didn't want to be part of our decisions. I thought I was helping, she cried. You always trusted her more. You always relied on her. I wanted to show you I could take care of you too. Her voice cracked, and the defensiveness crumbled. What remained was raw fear. Fear of insignificance. Fear of being overshadowed. Fear of losing the role she had carved for herself. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she grabbed the edges of the table. I thought, if I didn't take charge, I would disappear. I thought you'd always choose her over me. My mother reached toward her instinctively, her own face anguished. Lila, sweetheart. I watched quietly. I felt no triumph, only heartbreak. Not for the estate, but for the years of unspoken insecurity that had driven her to this point. My father rubbed his forehead. Why didn't you talk to us? Why didn't you talk to Margaret? Lila shook her head helplessly. Because she's always so calm. So sure. She never needs anyone. The ache in my chest deepened. Lila, I said softly, I have always needed family. I just never demanded it. She sobbed harder at that, her hands covering her face. My parents looked devastated, torn between compassion and disbelief, between guilt for not noticing and confusion over how deeply they'd misread the situation. My father's voice broke the silence. Margaret, could we have some time alone with your sister? My mother nodded, wiping her tears. Please. We need to talk to her privately. I stood, my heart heavy but steady, knowing the conversation behind closed doors would determine everything that happened next. I stood in the hallway, just outside the closed living room door, listening to the rise and fall of voices I had known my entire life. They were strained now, fragile, cracked at the edges, as my family confronted the consequences of decades of misplaced assumptions and quiet favoritism. I could not hear every word, only fragments carried through the wooden door. My mother's heartbreak, my father's confusion, Lila's tears. This was not a moment I took any satisfaction in. There was no vindication in hearing my sister weep or my parents express regret. Instead, I felt a familiar ache, one I had learned to carry over years of being the stable one, the reliable one, the daughter who asked for little and received even less in terms of emotional acknowledgement. I leaned gently against the hallway wall, hands clasped before me, and let my thoughts drift backward. I thought of childhood afternoons when I had been told to let Lila have the bigger slice of cake because she felt things more deeply. I thought of teenage years spent smoothing over conflicts, taking blame to keep the peace. I thought of college, work, and adulthood, chapters where responsibility fell naturally to me, while Lila was sheltered under the belief that she needed more. For so long, I thought the imbalance was harmless, a quirk of our family dynamic. But now, with the estate documents laid bare and my parents grappling with the truth, I understood something I had missed for years. Kindness without boundaries invites misuse, even unintentionally. I had loved my family quietly, but I had not required them to see me clearly, and because of that, they never truly did. Behind the door, voices rose again. "I should have asked," my mother cried. "I should have checked with Margaret. I should have questioned." "We made assumptions," my father said heavily. "All of us." Then Lila's voice, softer, trembling. "I didn't want to lose my place. I didn't know how else to keep it." A sharp ache ran through me. I closed my eyes. After several minutes, the voices quieted. Footsteps moved toward the door, and then my father opened it slowly. His face looked older somehow, not just aged, but worn with realization. "Margaret," he said in a low, steady voice. "Come in." I stepped into the room. My mother was seated on the couch, dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief. Lila sat beside her, shoulders hunched, eyes red but watchful. The tension had thinned, replaced by something more exhausted, more vulnerable. My father motioned for me to sit. "Your mother and we owe you an apology." My mother reached for my hand with both of hers. "We are so sorry. We let ourselves believe things that weren't true. We should have come to you. We should have asked. We should have seen what was happening." Her remorse was genuine. It softened something in me. Not forgiveness yet, but understanding. "We want to fix this," my father continued. "We're going to amend the estate. Restore the equal distribution we originally agreed on." A quiet breath escaped me. Relief, not triumph. "That means a great deal," I said softly. "Thank you." My mother clasped my hand tighter. We didn't realize how easily we were being guided. We didn't want to think of it as manipulation, but that's what it was. Lila looked up at me then. Her expression was not defiant, nor defensive, but fragile. "Margaret," she whispered, "I'm sorry." The words were thin, but they were honest. "I never meant to hurt you. I felt like you already had everything. I thought taking care of them was the only thing I could do better than you." I held her gaze. She had always been the more emotional one, but this was different. Raw, exposed. "I believe you," I said. "But believing you doesn't excuse what happened." She nodded, tears welling again. "I know." "I'm not interested in punishing you," I added. "I want us to move forward with honesty and boundaries." A small, shaky smile flickered across her lips. "I can try." My father exhaled, relief softening his features. "We all need to try." The rest of the afternoon passed in quieter conversation. Plans were made to contact the lawyer. My parents insisted on handling the revisions themselves this time, with me copied directly into every communication. Lila remained quiet, chastened but present, as though trying to understand her new place in the family without the scaffolding of old favoritism. As the sun began to dip, casting warm amber light through the living room window, I felt something loosen inside me, an old knot of tension finally beginning to unwind. We weren't healed. Not yet. But we were no longer tangled in the same illusions. Before I left, my mother hugged me tightly, her hands trembling. "Thank you," she whispered, "for being patient, for being steady, for telling us the truth even when it hurt." I kissed her cheek. "I love you. That hasn't changed." Driving home, I felt a quiet peace settle over me, not the shallow kind that ignores wrongdoing, but the deeper kind that comes from choosing clarity over resentment, justice without cruelty, boundaries without bitterness. Later that evening, as I was placing the evidence folder back into my desk drawer, my phone rang. "Attorney Hartwell's number," I answered. "This is Margaret." His voice sounded unusually serious. "Mrs. Ellison, I've reviewed the earlier drafts again, as you requested, and I found something, a clause I had overlooked the first time. I think you need to see this immediately." A chill ran through me. I gripped the receiver, bracing myself, uncertain whether this new clause would heal the situation further or unravel it all over again. The next morning, I drove to Attorney Hartwell's office with the same steady resolve that had carried me through each step of this ordeal. I didn't know what the overlooked clause contained, but the seriousness in his tone the night before told me it was significant. Not catastrophic, he would have said so, but important enough to shift the path we were on. The autumn air felt crisp as I stepped out of my car, the kind of air that carries both endings and beginnings. I walked into the building, greeted the receptionist, and was ushered into Hartwell's office almost immediately. He stood when I entered, offering a nod of respect. "Mrs. Ellison, thank you for coming so quickly." "What did you find?" I asked. He gestured for me to sit and laid out a single sheet of paper, an earlier draft, tucked inside a section of the file that had been misfiled. His finger tapped a paragraph near the bottom. "This clause," he said, "changes everything." I leaned forward and read. It stated that in the event of any confusion, undue influence, or emotional pressure, my parents retain the full right to revise or reinstate any earlier version of their estate plan without penalty, challenge, or obligation to justify their decision to any party involved. I read it again, slower. "This means," Hartwell continued, "that your parents can revert to the equal distribution without facing legal pushback. Not from your sister, not from any attorney, not from any previous draft your sister may have presented." A slow breath left me. Relief mingled with quiet gratitude. "So they're free to correct the situation." "Entirely," he confirmed. "And more importantly, they'll have full authority to do so in a way that reflects their true intent, not the version filtered through someone else's influence." I nodded, letting that truth settle. Fairness was now not just a possibility, it was protected. "I appreciate you finding this," I said. "It gives us space to move forward without conflict." "When families face these situations," he replied gently, "the law should support clarity, not deepen wounds." I thanked him and left with a renewed sense of purpose. This wasn't about restitution or vindication. It was about restoring equilibrium, truthfully, respectfully, permanently. That afternoon, we gathered again at my parents' home for what would be our final major conversation about the estate. The tension that had hung over the previous days had softened into something more fragile, more hopeful. My parents sat side by side on the couch, hands intertwined. Lila sat in the armchair, her posture straight but unguarded. I took my seat across from them. My father cleared his throat. "The lawyer called us as well, Margaret. He told us about the clause." My mother nodded. "We want to finalize the equal distribution, the way it always should have been." I folded my hands on my lap. "Thank you. That means more than you know." Lila looked between us. Her voice was quiet. "I won't fight it. I don't want to. I want to fix things too. I know I broke trust." Her admission was not dramatic, not tearful, just honest. I met her gaze. "Rebuilding trust is possible, but it takes time and participation." She nodded slowly. "I'm willing." The four of us discussed everything calmly. We reviewed the original provisions, ensured they reflected fairness, and made notes for the next draft that Hartwell would prepare. My parents insisted on keeping their medical and financial provisions joint and equal, with clear guidelines for future decision-making. Not once did the conversation turn accusatory. It stayed grounded in facts, honesty, and a gentler kind of accountability. When the decisions were finalized, my father placed his hand over mine. "We were wrong," he said softly. "We should have seen what was happening." My mother wiped her eyes. "We should have protected both of you, not just one." I squeezed their hands. "We move forward now. We learn from what happened." Lila leaned forward slightly, her voice trembling. "I know I said things that weren't true. I know I shaped their view of you, even when I didn't realize how much I was doing it. I'm sorry, Margaret. Truly." Her apology held more steadiness than before, less fear, more sincerity. "I accept your apology," I said softly, "but accepting it doesn't mean forgetting. It means choosing to heal with honesty." She nodded again, tears shining but unfallen. The meeting ended not with declarations, but with a quiet sense of repair. A small shift, a first step. Weeks passed. Hartwell finalized the documents. My parents signed them with clear awareness and without hesitation. Lila signed her acknowledgments as well, participating openly, without bitterness. And gradually, our conversations softened. Lila and I spoke more honestly than we had in years. My parents made an effort to check assumptions rather than accept them blindly. We found new ways to be a family, not the version built on habit and hierarchy, but one built on clarity. There were still moments of discomfort, of course. Truth-telling doesn't erase history, but it creates space for something better. On a quiet evening not long after the final signing, I sat on my porch with a cup of tea, reflecting on everything that had happened. The grief, the betrayal, the revelations, the cautious healing. I felt older, not in years, but in understanding. Justice, I realized, isn't always loud. Sometimes it looks like a steady voice, a calm question, a boundary drawn with grace. Sometimes it's the quiet refusal to be erased. And forgiveness, true forgiveness, is not the absolution of wrongdoing. It's the agreement to move forward with eyes open, heart steady, and no illusions. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I imagined speaking to the people who might one day hear my story. If you ever find yourself in a place where someone tries to rewrite your worth, I would tell them, stand firm. Not with anger, but with clarity. Document the truth. Speak with calm. Maintain compassion for others and for yourself, and remember, fairness is not granted freely. Sometimes you must illuminate the path back to it. In the end, boundaries are not barriers. They are the framework for love that lasts. And that, above all, is the truest inheritance any family can offer.